Business Sidekick.
Hi all, welcome to Business Sidekick, a podcast where me and my guests are exploring the e-commerce universum, trying to bring value to our listeners and help them survive in an online jungle. My today's guest is Lute Atieh, Chief Operating Officer and Vice President of the Board at American Business and Technology University. We're talking about how the technology is changing the world we're living. Is our future going to be bright and beautiful, or is it going to be doom and gloom? Enjoy!
Business Sidekick.
Hello, Lute. I'm happy to have you here in my podcast. Thanks for accepting my invitation.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Can you please tell our listeners something about yourself?
Well, I work in education, but as incredibly boring as that sounds, I do have some fairly exciting hobbies. I'm actually a pilot. I enjoy flying small planes.
Wow!
For being a tech geek, I enjoy a fair amount of outdoor activities. I really do like spending the majority of my time outside, but equally, I really enjoy being on the computer, so it's a battle.
Why you didn't tell me anything about the pilot thing? Wow.
Yeah, it's something I've been working on for 10 years, and I finally got serious last year and decided to finish my license and take the exam. And to my surprise, I actually passed the first time.
Yeah, to your surprise. Don't be so shy. Congratulations, then.
Thank you.
All right, so let's talk a bit about how is the technology changing the world. Because the funny thing about technology is that the world isn't changing century to century anymore, or even decade to decade. It's changing year to year, right?
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. If we look at technology, just let's use education for example. I'm interested in technology and how it changes different industries. Most of mine happens to be education. So when we talk about the last 10 years in training and education, the majority of that change has happened probably, in the last 5 years, I would suppose, 5 or 6 years. The amount of time it takes now to absorb new information is getting shorter and shorter, and the kids growing up with this. So I'm just old enough to remember not having smart devices or even a cell phone.
I remember I'm old too.
Yeah, I remember my dad having like a bag phone when I was 12, and I thought this was like cool. The Jetsons, So now I have, I see kids in my family, cousins, my little brothers, and they're growing up with an iPhone in their hand, before they can properly speak. And the learning curve for them is going to be so much less that if technology doesn't improve, or if companies don't improve what they're doing, they're not going to be able to keep up to the demand of these kids that are growing up with this technology.
Mm-hmm. And from the educational perspective, how do you find all those kids, checking their mobiles all the time? You think it's beneficial for them?
I think that it is, we're fortunate where the majority of our students are working adults, but even your late 20s and 30s and 40-year-olds are almost as bad with being attached to the phone.
Yes.
And since we do deliver education online, you're in your home, the distractions are even greater, and sometimes you're using your mobile phone to engage with your instructor and your live lectures. So, I think those people who can properly balance the addiction, if you will, and me being an addict myself, I really can't stay away from electronics, but
I'm
those that can balance
well.
it, yeah, exactly. Who isn't, right? And I think those that can balance it are going to be the most successful in life. But you have to have a healthy respect for the fact that technology will take over your life and will leave you feeling, somewhat dazed and confused more often than not if you don't control it and use it as a tool and not allow it to distract you, whether it's in schoolwork or your relationships or at home. It's not a decision you make. It's a battle every day to make sure that you put it aside to really focus on getting things done, which is why I think the older generation is still dominating the majority of business and technology, because they were around before and they understand how to really make it a commodity, an accommodation rather, than to be a focal point.
And if we're talking about technology, I've read recently that for the first time in our history, the biggest companies in the world are high-tech companies, like Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, or Facebook.
Right.
If you're not following the technology, your company might just go bankrupt. Don't you think so?
I would agree. I think that in almost all cases, at least in our lifetime, companies that fail to make the change, or at least to acknowledge the fact that a good number of their customers or consumers are going to demand something that's more technologically appealing to them. I just read an article about Garmin recently. In the last, 3 or 4 or 5 years or something, their handheld GPS systems basically fell off the face of the earth. They lost, $1.5 billion in revenue because of the iPhone. So what did Garmin do? They could have, packed up and went away from, doing the old handheld GPS, but rather they got into fitness technology wear. So they met the needs of their consumer with wearable technology, which, just 10 years ago was science fiction. So companies like Garmin reinventing themselves to accommodate the new generations of users, after serving an older population of, window mount GPS units for the last 10, 15 years, that's a great example of a company saying, all right, listen, GPS is not where it used to be. It's free on the iPhone and Android phones now. So where do we go? What do we do? Unless companies are willing to make that uncomfortable transition, companies, schools, organizations, doesn't matter who you are, you have to either make that change or you'll cease to exist in a few short years.
I think that maybe that's because startups are so successful because they're so flexible. I used to work in a company it was 10 years ago, and for example, they had so old school PCs that we couldn't even, manage to do anything in Excel. And it was really difficult for them to shift from the old school thinking about technology in business to the new one. And there were a couple hundred of people working there, and it was a mess, really. So the revenue went down every year and they couldn't figure out why. So all right, but it sounds like a con, right? If you don't follow the technology, you might be out of business. But maybe we could talk about the benefits of technology in business.
Right, yeah, I would agree. I think if there are still always industries that'll survive without it, but then the issue comes is your competitor is going to outperform you with technology if they're not involving technology. And, business owners, some of them are more technologically savvy, and they can appreciate and expect technology to come into their business to help them to become more efficient, to become more accessible, right? Those are probably the two biggest usage. And then there's the business owners that are a little bit scared and don't want to adapt or are afraid of the change. Ultimately, those are the ones that end up going away. But if you can adopt technology to help your business, and for business owners, and I can speak to this a little bit because this is a family institution that we run, and my father being the founder and me being much younger, roughly half his age, it was a very painful experience to take risks for him, but I was fortunate that my father is a computer programmer, so he is not your typical business owner. Now he's still scared of new kind of obscure technology, things that we're very comfortable with, but I didn't fight the challenge that many have to fight with their bosses or founders, with embracing technology. But, everybody has their own challenges with technology. And when it comes to the new age of marketing, internet-based marketing, or even internet-based support, where, people like us don't really want to be on the phone. I don't want to call a 1-800 number for support. I want to chat with somebody.
Exactly.
So I actually only do business with sites if I can get away with it that offer a chat support, because I don't want to sit on the phone for 40 minutes. I'd rather just wait for the chat to pop up with my answer. So actually
sounds like we're typical millennials, right?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, for our business, for our university and our founder, the biggest struggle for him was accepting the fact that customer service is no longer going to be phone-based, and that is the choice of the consumer, actually. And that was really the biggest struggle, actually, which is interesting because that's mostly what our students prefer is text and chat response only.
I've heard recently from my friend that her grandmother thinks that if you're sitting in front of a computer, you're not working at all. Because she can't imagine that someone could work on this little thing, So,
yeah, boy, yeah.
Yeah, so the benefits of technology is that it's very fast and you earn a lot of time, right? What are other benefits?
Well, I think if we're looking for let's talk about chat for a second, especially let's talk about how allowing, that type of communication improves customer satisfaction, for example. So I think in our business, let's talk 10 years ago when we were shipping books and CDs as well, instead of using online material. In the past, a student would make a phone call, leave a voicemail if somebody was busy, or send an email, and then they would take 24 hours or next business day to respond, and that was acceptable. But the amount of human resources that takes is unbelievable. So now let's fast forward to today. I'm a particular customer or a student, and I am doing my homework at 11:30 Sunday night. Because I've had a busy weekend and I have a question, or I've managed to lock myself out of my account, or I can't check out, or whatever the issue is. Just companies are able to recognize more revenue, higher student and customer satisfaction by making the tools available to their customers whenever they have access to it. Because the 8 to 5 doesn't really exist anymore, does it? I mean, companies, maybe shifts are 8 to 5, but the majority of companies that at least I deal with almost run a 24-hour operation, if not 24-hour extended business hours, because one of the things that drives me nuts personally is if I need to go somewhere and it closes at 5. I don't remember the last time I got off work at 5, but I also didn't go in until maybe 9:30, for example. So I think, I'm going to people will demand that things are more accommodating, and that's how business can fill that gap. It still drives me nuts. I used to bank at a traditional bank before I went online, and the bank closed at 5 o'clock. On Friday, it was like 3:30. I'm just thinking to myself, how on earth are you going to survive? If I have to leave work early to deposit a check. So, banks got with it, and now they do online banking, e-check deposit. That's a great example, another good industry of ones that have really gotten with the times and used technology to help them.
Everything is about effectiveness and about optimization, and we build faster computers to build faster computers, and right. I'm wondering if there's a limit somewhere. Where are we heading to?
That's a good question, because if I'm speaking personally, I embrace technology to save time, and then I try to imagine that I'm going to use that time for something personal. But really, all I'm doing is just becoming more efficient and trying to accomplish more in less time, so I can keep accomplishing more. It's a disease that I don't know, what happens when I reach that breaking point, or somebody does. But I can tell that the more that I embrace technology, the more relaxed I seem to be, because I feel like there's a structure in place. There's some sort of efficiency, and personally it's been a struggle, but I'll try to make more time for hobbies and my family, and just sort of disconnecting. Ironically, I use technology to accomplish as much as I can, so I can try to disconnect. And that's one of the reasons I became a pilot. It's the only thing ever that I can do that actually fully distracts me from all things work and technology related, because I'm using a totally different part of my brain, and I actually walk away feeling somewhat mentally reset and relaxed. But I honestly don't know. I can feel myself at sometimes building to this critical mass where I'm thinking, man, how efficient, how much work can you actually cram into a day and still be efficient? So I suppose this is why vacations exist, right?
Yeah, I read that half of Americans don't take it. So
I can tell you from a personal experience that our company cashes out more vacation than people use.
Okay.
And it's not good. People really need to take more breaks.
Oh, yes, that's true. All right. And I read that before 2050, the computer will be as, efficient as human brain. Have you ever asked yourself, what are we doing and why are we doing it?
I can, the techie side of me wants to believe that's true, but I still think there's a lot of emotional intelligence that goes into doing something successfully, running a business, interacting with people. And I just don't think, and of course I'll hear myself in 40 years and laugh, but I just don't think that technology has gotten to that point where it can successfully manage relationships like humans can. And that's why, although we're in a digital age, I think those companies that still add a human element to their business are still the ones that are probably more successful. But no, I see that. I understand the question, the challenge of, where are we headed? Some sort of Terminator style world where the machine,
Hopefully
we're just
not.
obsolete. We're like pets,
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. I try not to ask myself questions like that give me a headache. I just move on.
So when I was recently thinking about the artificial intelligence, I've asked myself if it is possible that one day artificial intelligence will be more effective than people are. And I had only one response to that machines won't have emotions, so they won't be able to work the same way we do. But
Correct.
Speaking of artificial intelligence, many people are afraid of technological unemployment. Do you think that it will happen?
I actually do think. I think that a lot of, and I can see it even in, we teach technology and business courses, and a lot of what we teach, a lot of what I see is basically automation, making things more efficient. It's a reduction of need of a lot of human labor between robots and software and, the number of things that make businesses more efficient and lean. I do think that that's going to be really challenging for the economy and employees, especially those that are underskilled employees. I mean, it's manufacturing is a great example. The manufacturing line may have had 10 people, per 50 feet on it, and now it's 2 robots and 1 supervisor. Using Tesla as an example with how their cars are built. It's amazing how strong and how good a quality, and it's just a robot that's actually doing it versus people.
Mm-hmm. So we should be afraid.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a healthy fear. That means that you should keep learning, and if something is chasing you like technology and automation, then you should probably learn that, so you're on the right side of how this is all going to play out. You need to be on the side that's sort of designing and running these things, and not just on the side of turning a wrench or whatever that is. And even those people that are in those areas need to learn technology. But to sort of add to this, I also think that small business, home-based businesses, the entrepreneurial spirit is coming back, because at some point part of society is really wanting to get to that personal connection. So we're heading sort of back that direction a little bit. I know a lot of most jobs in small businesses are using some sort of technology, but especially with the older generation, at some point they're going to prefer to deal with human beings over machines and robots.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Terminators, don't you think that it's quite dangerous to rely on technology so much?
Oh, absolutely. I think that probably not right now. I think there's enough manual processes that society wouldn't completely fall apart if we lost a good majority of our technology. But as I mentioned earlier, with the kids who are 4, 5, 6 years old right now, if something happens in their lifetime when they're adults, they could very well be helpless. I have more millennial friends that don't know how to fry an egg properly than I care to admit, that they just never learned to cook. They don't know how to cook. I was fortunate enough to learn how to cook because I grew up before there were gaming consoles in every house, and we had one computer between the whole family, and it was, then $4,000, so it had a fence around it, and we couldn't touch it without supervision.
Oh, I understand it.
But I honestly believe that in the face of traumatic events a few generations from now, they're going to be completely useless without technology.
Yeah, but we still have preppers, right?
That's right. We still have preppers.
Yeah, so humanity will survive. All right. So my final question: do you observe any trends in business technology? Where do you think we will be in about 10 or 20 years?
No, that's a good question. I think the biggest thing I observe, it's largely, and I feel bad that we pick on millennials so much, but I guess we've sort of created this monster. But this on-demand everything is pushing businesses to respond to that. And in 10 years' time, I can't imagine there will be such a thing as business hours. I think we're going to have a society where literally everything is on demand, It's happening in almost every industry as we speak. And there will sort of not be this work day and this work week. It's just going to be just all the time on demand everything, which can be good. It can also be bad because it sets some unrealistic expectations for things that cannot be on demand or all the time. I see the family dynamic sort of being negatively impacted by that, spouses and things like that, where everything's catered to you, and then you go home and you have to have like a real conversation with a human being, and you have to sort of give a little and get a little, and that's where things will start to break down, where relationships will be easier online than they are in person. I'm grateful that I'm not in that generation.
Oh my God, it all sounds awful. Are there any bright sides of it?
I mean, if it's not Terminators that are going to end us, it's going to be basically that nobody can have one-on-one relationships and conversations in 20 years without talking through a device.
Thanks so much for this vision.
What's that movie with what's it called, Surrogates or something, where everybody's at home and they're like beautiful robots are out walking around interacting?
I watched this movie. It was really bad.
That's 20-30 years from now. That's what I see, I think.
Oh my, all right. So thank you very much for this interview. It was really fun. Thank you.
No problem. Take care.
Business Sidekick.
That's all for today, and as always, thanks for listening. Stay tuned, as in 2 weeks I'm going to publish the new episode of Business Sidekick with another interesting guest, so subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud. Live long and prosper.
This podcast was brought to you by LiveChat.